This is the whole ball game right now in America. Do people actually want to be free? They want to be free if we teach freedom as a desirable value. But we must teach that freedom cannot exist without responsibility.
Something that you shouldn't be doing, especially in Seattle of all places, right? And talking politics and government at church. And I'm wondering, aren't you worried about being accused? Okay, this is like the worst kind of accusation, right? Like, and this is probably the nightmare of anybody here, okay? But aren't you accused of being a Christian nationalist?
Yeah, am I afraid of being accused? First of all, this whole idea of like Christian nationalism is such a joke because it's two separate words that I do identify with, but they're trying to use it as a slur. What they're trying to say is you Christians shouldn't care about your government, which is totally against Jeremiah 29:7.
Come on.
Where Jeremiah 29:7 says, demand the welfare of the nation that you are in because your welfare is tied to your nation's welfare. Look, the Bible should instruct every single part of your life, and it does for me. And for people that they say, well, I don't do politics, we don't do that at church. Look, it's not the most important thing. The most important thing is Jesus. The most important thing is Jesus. I'll say that again and again and again. And however, we have to ask, are there other things that Jesus wants us to be engaged or involved in? Of course, when Jesus said at the mouth of the Jordan River, he said, on this rock build my church, but the word is actually ecclesia. It's a Greek word that means community gathering point. It means, really it was the ancient equivalent of getting involved in politics, right? The business of the city. And I look for some of you who say, well, Charlie, I just come to church, to feel good and to get charged up. Well, that's not what church should be. Church should challenge you in every facet of your life to become better in your marriage, to become a better son, to become better at saving money, to become better at running your business, better at treating people that are not like you. And yes, understanding the proper form of government. And you must first ask some questions. Is there a God? Well, better sheet. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That means that there is a God and you are not him. That's a big deal.
That's true.
What is a human being? A human being is created in the image of God with a soul, that we are here for a purpose.
Yes.
So once you answer these questions, then you can design government. And you have to ask yourself the question, if you care about the downtrodden, if you care about people that are not able to fight for themselves, the last 100 years, what has been the number one murderer of humanity? It's been government. It's been tyrannical, authoritarian government. And for the church to now be disconnected, be like, I don't care about government. I don't care about our leaders. This is a new modern twist on Christianity that is not biblical. So everything we're going to be talking about is biblical in nature because God wants you to be free. It's his heart for his people to be free. That is the story of the Exodus. That is what Christ comes. As it says very clearly, the Spirit of the Lord is liberty, that free from bondage. And so my calling in this is to go to churches, and we'll explore this together, and to try to warn the American church that if the church does not speak clearly and truthfully in such a time as this, then this Marxist godless movement is going to take over our entire country. In fact, it already is. The American church founded America, and America will survive or die based on whether or not the American church stands up and proclaims the truth.
Wow. So God's been speaking to you a lot about Exodus recently, and some very interesting prophetic parallelism as far as what's happening. And I wanted to ask you, I think a lot of us, because we are the church, right, versus going to a building and calling that church, right? So I think that a lot of us, we the church, okay, might wrestle a little bit with what does it look like to be in the culture? Like, what does it look like to have a vibrant church that's bringing reform and bringing kingdom within the culture, okay? And as we've wrestled with that tremendously, especially in our country, but also, how does that fit with some of the things that God is showing you out of the book of Exodus and the role of the righteous?
Yeah, I mean, we were just talking, my good friend up here, about the first 5 books of the Bible, which unfortunately too many Christians don't study. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Numbers should be called In the Wilderness, which is actually what it's called. I don't know about you, but when I was young, I never read Numbers because I thought it was a math book. And the actual title is In the Wilderness. That's way cooler. By the way, it's one of the most amazing books of the Bible. You have talking donkeys, spies, giants, Hebrews complaining, but that's basically every book, so that's not unique to... But it's an amazing book, and you have spies, right? You have this incredible book, and Numbers. Can you think of a worse title of one of the most exciting book? Numbers. The actual Hebrew is in the wilderness. That's a separate issue. But I've really been continually drawn to Exodus. And Exodus comes from two Greek words, exodos, the way out. And in some ways, I think we need deliverance, the way that God delivered his chosen people out of the slavery and out of the authoritarianism of Pharaoh. There's a couple of verses I want to highlight to you in Exodus, one in particular, which I think is the turning point, if you will, of the entire Torah of the Old Testament, which you remember the story of Joseph. Joseph goes to Egypt. He does not interpret the dreams. God interprets the dreams. He merely communicates it. And he really saves Egypt from famine, from starvation. It's this beautiful story, and that's how the book of Genesis ends. And the book of Exodus begins, and it's this it's like first couple verses is, and then rose a king of Egypt who did not know Joseph.
Wow.
And everything changes. And you could apply that today, because the root of that is ingratitude and a loss of memory of the sacrifices of generations before you. And boy, does that not accurately describe the education system, our political system. We're tearing down our statues. We're rewriting our history. Then rose a generation who did not know George Washington. Then rose a generation who did not know Abraham Lincoln. So that really speaks to me there.
Yeah.
And the story and the struggle of Exodus, obviously Moses gets called out of a rather comfortable life. And he actually likes his father-in-law, which for some of you, I'm told that's actually, I have a great relationship with my in-laws, but him and Jethro are getting along great. And then he comes along this bush and it changes his life. It's like, that bush is burning, but it's not consuming, and brings him on an adventure. And it's actually really interesting because in Numbers and in Deuteronomy, he kind of almost laments this journey in some way. Like, God, why did you put me with these people? They won't stop complaining. And it doesn't really... God says, yeah, tough luck, basically. But Moses is I think Moses is one of the most interesting characters in the entire Bible, really being a messenger for God's purpose and God's will. But the struggle is against tyranny.
Wow.
But let me just fast forward really quick, right? Because we know what happens. God delivers them, plagues, parting of the sea, all that good stuff. But what I find to be so fascinating and so applicable to our time is what happens when the Jewish people get freedom. And this happens repeatedly. It happens in Exodus and it happens in Numbers, specifically in Numbers 11, okay? So they're given this freedom and they saw miracle after miracle, and they needed and wanted for nothing. Quail blown off course, manna from heaven. And I quote, they start complaining and say, who's this Moses guy? Bring us back to Egypt where we had leeks, melons, and cucumbers. We want to go back to Egypt because at least we were able to eat meat. They go as far as saying, I wish we would have died in Egypt, because they said, everything was free. They say that in Numbers 11, we didn't have to pay for anything. They were slaves, which I think is, hold on a second, this is one of the most amazing parts of the Bible. Here are people that are given deliverance by God. They saw the most amazing miracles. They're in a state of freedom and they prefer comfort. Because in the wilderness is tough. In the wilderness challenges you. When you were in Egypt, you had to work 7 days. There was no Shabbat. You worked every single day. And it was tough, and some people died. But they almost got into this place where they didn't have to think for themselves. One of the most amazing people I've ever had on my podcast is Yeonmi Park. I don't know if you're familiar with her. If not, you should be familiar. She's a North Korean defector, dissident who escaped. And in my conversation with her, I asked her, I said, tell me about what it was like coming from a totalitarian country, North Korea, to then a free society of South Korea and then Japan, eventually America. She said, Charlie, the hardest thing is that I would have to take naps for the first couple of weeks because I had to think. And I never had to do that for the first 17 years of my life in North Korea. And she said, that was really exhausting. And she said, I almost wanted to be back in the place where everything was told, and I did it. And here's this picture where God delivers his chosen people, and they say, I don't want liberty. This is the whole ball game right now in America. Do people actually want to be free? They want to be free if we teach freedom as a desirable value. But we must teach that freedom cannot exist without responsibility. It's impossible. So we're at this place in America right now where half of America wants to go back to Egypt.
Wow.
And half America wants to remain free. Where are we divided? That's the true division. Is half the country is saying, take us back to slavery. Take it, because at least we eat meat. At least we get weed. At least we get whatever. Where the other half is like, no, we want to fulfill. We want to have the more challenging but deeper life. So I think it speaks very clearly in the time we're living today.
Wow. Come on.